Hello, Yakri here with another Warframe video. This time I'm going to be going over Khora and just a general guide to playing her and a couple of builds that I would recommend for her. So I want to talk about her abilities first and just go over them one by one, although you're probably already familiar with them, but it's good to review. So Whip Claw is her one ability. It's better than a lot of Warframe ones in the game, I suppose, although it's not super powerful. I find it's fairly useful up to about level 100 enemies. Depending on your build. And it's basically a melee, let's call it a melee ability, kind of like Atlas's one, but less powerful damage-wise, and it doesn't have a combo mechanic. Instead, it gets a longer range and a solid radius of base radius of 5 meters, which can be increased up to 200% of the base ability range. I believe that means it's just 10 meters is the cap. I'm pretty sure. And it's affected by primed reach as well. So if you have a low range build, I think you can still get it up quite a bit. Its damage is a little mediocre, but the range is the nice thing. You can hit a lot of enemies simultaneously with this ability, which gives it some value, especially up to enemies around level 80, where it still does solid damage and can kill enemies in a couple hits if you combine it with Ensnare and bring a melee weapon that is set up to work well with Whip Claw, as it has a lot of restrictions on what mods work with it. Now, Ensnare is one of her better abilities. Ensnare and Strangledome are like kind of the standout abilities that she has. Ensnare now is quite good after the recent changes to it. It used to be completely broken up until the most recent patch, and just didn't really work. But they removed the line of sight checks it used to have, and they fixed the issue where if any enemy died, all the enemies were released. What's supposed to happen is that if any enemy dies, no enemies are released at all. So that's how it works now, making it a pretty solid ability. It's similar to Nidus's 2, but weaker, except with the caveat that you can cast on multiple enemies, and there's no recast penalty or anything, and it lasts for a long time. I would say it's a pretty solid ability in general when you build for it. Venari is a little bit shit. She's still very buggy. She's still has pathing issues. Her damage is okay, but she only attacks one enemy at a time, so she's rather lackluster for DPS. Her heal is alright, that's probably the best thing about her, and her protect mode is useless. But she's more convenient than when she was initially released. I'm hoping they'll do a little bit more fixing to her later, or perhaps we'll simply have to wait for Pets 2.0, and hopefully like the bulk changes to Pets will actually make Venari considerably more powerful. Right now, I would just say she's there to heal you from time to time, but don't rely on her too much. Also, having like some pet mods are nice to have, like extra copies of, like more enemy radar and stuff. So she's nice for that. Now, Strangledome is pretty 50-50 on it. I'm really 50-50 on it because it's a good ability, sort of, but it's really counter to what you want to do in Warframe. When you're playing solo, this ability is great. And when you're playing in certain types and levels of missions in a group, it's a good ability. And then in other cases, it's a bad ability. So if you want to kill enemies quickly and the enemies are really tough, Strangledome is a bad ability because it separates out enemies and makes it harder to shoot them. However, it makes enemies take double damage from weapons, and it deals a decent amount of slashing damage itself, and it disables all the enemies in it. So if you're playing solo and you just really need to survive, it's very useful. All the enemies also become decoys, right? Like they draw aggro, so it's very effective at locking down a room of enemies, more so even than all the enemies it can pick up. So it does do a decent amount to protect you, but it's going to also do a decent amount to annoy your teammates if you're playing in a squad. So be careful about how much you use it. On lower level missions, very high range Strangledome, I would say, is incredibly powerful because it's got a radius of 5 meters, right, and a grab radius of 10 meters, and both scale with range, which means that if you use max range builds, it's like the farthest out enemy it can potentially grab is extremely far away from the center point you cast it from. Which means it has just a huge coverage area for picking up enemies. And if it kills enemies within a second or two, it's going to end up just like snatching enemies from all over the map and kill them very quickly. And you can have 2 of these out at the same time. So the total area you can cover with sort of like a passive ability that's going to last like over 20 seconds and just kill everything around it is like, you can just cover a massive area. So she's kind of like a low-level mission slaughterer, or in higher-level missions, she becomes more of a, CC Warframe, especially centering around Ensnare. If you play Sanctuary Onslaught with her, like a fairly okay strategy is to use Ensnare and then use a weapon like the Amprex to kill enemies, or use Whip Claw to kill the enemies after, binding them up. Okay, so let's actually look at the builds I've got on her. So, this is kind of a generalist build that I have on. I wouldn't say it's my favorite one, but like if you want to just kind of do whatever you want in missions, this is pretty decent. It gets a little bit of extra use out of Ensnare and Strangledome by increasing your range. Has high power strength, so you can use Whip Claw effectively and get a large heal out of Venari. And that's about it, right? That's the deal with this build. Hunter's Adrenaline because you can heal yourself, and it's a free energy, right? That's free real estate, yeah. Whatever. Okay, so this is the build I actually like for missions. It's not appropriate for every type of mission. Another note about this is that this build is pretty good on missions where you're like in this sweet spot where this will allow Strangledome to easily kill enemies, and this range build with only 70 power strength would not allow Strangledome to easily kill enemies. And this build, however, is better on lower level missions and better on even higher level missions. And that's because on even higher level missions, the crowd control is going to really matter. And on lower level missions, the damage is still going to be high enough to quickly kill enemies. And when that's the case, you just want more range to cover as wide of an area as possible. So I'm not going to do too much showing off with Configuration C, but just, take a look at it. You can pause the video here. If you want a generalist build, I would recommend this. It's pretty decent. I do think that she is a frame where you don't want to really remove Primed Flow. You theoretically could, because she can heal herself and you could try and rely on Hunter's Adrenaline, especially with this build where you have more efficiency. Or with like Configuration A, you could swap Primed Flow for what's it called? Streamline. You can swap it for Streamline, and then that gets you more efficiency out of your Hunter's Adrenaline, right? Since you use your energy more efficiently, you don't have to take as much damage to keep your energy up. So that's also an option if you prefer that kind of playstyle. I don't, so that's why it's built the way it is, but your choice, right? Let's see. You could also, I haven't done it, but you could I believe the slot came with the dash polarity. You could forma it to a Y polarity, allowing you to get 15% more power range, which is a pretty reasonable choice for this Warframe. Yeah, more power range is always great. Okay, let's get some examples. Oh wait, actually, there's one other thing I should show you, which is my Sylva and Aegis build. I just do this build, or I'm just using Sylva and Aegis because it looks kind of cool. It's a sword and shield. I kind of like that, right? There's not actually a reason. All you want to do is you put a bunch of elemental mods on here. Berserker is actually kind of a waste of space. I don't know why I did that. I should just fix this really quick. But you put a bunch of elemental mods on here, and the elemental mods will give you a lot more damage. There we go. That's better. Right. Yeah. Elemental mods will give you a lot more damage. Condition Overload, I believe, does not work with Whip Claw. And I know that none of the Acolyte mods work with Whip Claw. So there's no whatchamacallit, Blood Rush. Blood Rush is not going to work with it. And since Condition Overload also doesn't work with it, kind of meh. Body Count does work with it. It's the only one that does. So you pretty much just have to pile on the elemental damage. You can also do crit, but without Blood Rush, you can't get 100% crit, so I don't like it because it's less reliable, right? I think Primed Reach is also kind of, I'm not sure if Primed Reach matters here. I'm a little unclear about that interaction, right? So this, yeah, it caps at 10 meters. I'm pretty sure that means that Primed Reach doesn't do anything in this case. You could probably replace that with, Organ Chatter? True Steel? Probably True Steel. Voltaic Strike, I bet. No. Bolt Strike probably doesn't work. Voltaic Strike, yeah. All right, there we go. That's the optimal build. I screwed up a little bit on that. So, yeah, let's take a look at what she can do with these abilities. So I think the most useful thing is going to be Ensnare versus high-level enemies. I believe I got these guys at level 100. And, okay, let's take a look at this. So Ensnare does a pretty good job of just pulling in all enemies. You can't really get a good idea of its range in this case. Once these guys come over closer, I can show you. All right, so when you whip the guys, oh, look, it sucks in more people. Great, right? Great efficiency there. So if we see the whipping them, versus level 100 enemies, this is still pretty good. You can see that the more heavily armored enemies are not dying very quickly from this. However, we'll get there eventually. Let's see all these guys, so they take double damage, keep in mind, from Ensnare. Without the Ensnare double damage bonus, this is like going to be pretty sad. You also really do, against, like, not against other types of enemies besides Grineer, really, but versus Grineer, you really do also need that corrosive projection I had in the aura slot. That's going to give you a lot more damage than any of the other mods you could use to increase the damage of your whip. And now keep in mind, this is also with a low power strength build. If you do a high power strength build, you should have pretty good effectiveness up to level 100. Of course, it'll be harder to suck in enemies with Ensnare, and you really do need to use Ensnare to get a good effectiveness out of them. So keep that in mind. Okay, so let's see. I already showed you Ensnare and the Ensnare sucking enemies in more when you whip it. Let's take a look at her ultimate now. So as you can see, the area that's covered by this just sucked all the enemies up from over there, all the enemies up from over there. It just completely takes all the enemies and puts them in the dome, in the simulacrum. So I can't even really test with 2 domes in the simulacrum, because it gets everything. And the area it covers is huge. And let's just put up a second one for reference, right? So we got a second one up here. Let's take a look up here. So we've got this huge dome over here, picking up a ton of enemies, and over here, another huge dome picking up a ton of enemies. On low-level missions, like if you're doing missions on Earth, if you're doing like Lith Fissures, this ability is going to be great, and it will kill a ton of enemies very quickly. And of course, versus high-level enemies, this still is pretty useful. Okay, so let's use Ensnare again, and this is pretty much what I like to do with her if I'm doing Sanctuary Onslaught or something. So you take a weapon like the Amprex, you ensnare all these enemies, and now this is like just a great AoE weapon, and it'll just burn through these guys so quickly. It gets a lot of benefit from sucking a lot of enemies into a group. Any explosive weapon will also be very effective, or using melee will be very effective. Although you probably should not build your melee weapon to make Whipclaw good if you're going to use actual melee, right? And Whipclaw also, you know, I'm starting from cold on that. So if you get your multiplier, your melee combo multiplier, up a ways before you use Whipclaw. All right, let's go up here and restart some enemies here. I'll just beat these guys up for a little bit to get my melee combo multiplier going. It's gonna be kind of hard since I don't have this like modded in a way that's sane for normal melee use, so it's kind of slow attack speed. But at 1.5, let's get to 2. Well, let's see if we can get to 2.5 before I start fighting them. Kind of doing pretty good damage to these guys, unfortunately. All right, so let's rope those guys up and look at the damage now. All right, so starting off, it's already pretty good. We're doing like, what is it, like 10% of their health and damage per hit. Getting a little bit better with viral procs on there. Not great, but they are level 100 heavy gunners, right? These are pretty tough enemies. If they didn't have armor, if you're running 4x corrosive projection, I think the damage would be a lot nicer looking. They would already be dead. But yeah, you know, such is life. These guys are pretty tough versus weaker enemies. Let me give you another example versus weaker enemies, and then I think that pretty much covers her abilities after this. So let's these guys, I'm gonna do it from a cold start because they're just gonna die if I wind it up a bit. So some of them, all right, there we go, like 2 whips. All right, so weaker enemies, as you can see, huge difference. Everyone likes to test versus bombards. I love to test versus bombards, and the reason is because, or bombards or heavy gunners, they have the same EHP. And the reason I like to test versus them, and a lot of other people do, of course, is because if you can kill them effectively at level 100, you can kill everything effectively at level 100. However, of course, a lot of enemies are not going to be bombards when you're doing an actual mission, which means that if you have a little bit of a hard time killing bombards, yeah, it's not necessarily a big problem because you can still have an easy time killing other types of enemies. Okay, so I've gone over Whipclaw, I've gone over Ensnare. I haven't really gone over Venari. I guess let's mess around with her a little bit. Let's bring the heavy gunners back. She can slowly kill the heavy gunners and she can strip them of armor, which is kind of neat. Let's command Venari to attack one of these guys. There we go. And she teleports in and attacks. That's a recent change that was made to Khora, and I think that's really nice. You can just keep telling her to attack this guy, and once she stops getting beat up, there we go. So this heavy gunner's starting to die sort of quickly. I am missing 1 plus damage mod that I could have on Venari. It's like this crit one that's super rare for pets. That might help a little bit, but other than that, You can hold the switch between modes, you can command her to heal you, and, well, she didn't come over here. Come heal me. There we go. Eventually she healed me. 35 HP regen per second with reduced power strength even. It's not bad. Falls off you if you leave the area around Venari. But if you also have the mod, let's take a look at Venari's modding that I've got right here. I should probably show that off anyway before we close this out. We've got Hunter Recovery, which causes you to be healed when she attacks something. So she doesn't do like great damage in the sense that she doesn't clear out level 100 bombards quickly or anything, but she does do great damage in terms of absolute numbers, which means that you're going to be healed by a pretty significant amount with Hunter Recovery, in addition to the fact that she has her own heal to heal you with. So fairly useful for those purposes. I think this covers everything that I wanted to cover with Khora. I think I'm gonna cut in some footage of me playing maybe Sanctuary Onslaught, maybe some other regular levels. I will say Khora is not like a super good Warframe for mobile areas because she just kind of like puts her domes, or mobile missions because she just puts her domes over an area and locks it down. Although theoretically you could like run through low level exterminates and just like drop a dome, move on to the next room, drop a dome, move on to the next room, and it'd probably just kill everything around you. Yeah, and there's always, you could just, you know, whip people with Whip Claw, but it's a kind of a weak ability, so you know. So yeah, these are the two builds I'd recommend. This one less so, but you know, if you want a more balanced experience, you want to make Whip Claw better, but otherwise, you know, just kind of generally play her and still use her CC abilities, I think Configuration C is good. But Configuration A that I've got here, just high power range with some duration, is pretty much the build. I think this is probably the most effective option for her with Hunter's Adrenaline and Vitality, which of course you can ditch both of those if you're playing with a Trinity, and you can instead get, you know, maybe some more efficiency, more power range, more power strength. Or actually throwing on Constitution for more duration would be a pretty reasonable option. Yeah, okay, so that pretty much covers it, and I'm going to cut over to some other footage. Alright, I ended up falling back on Hydron, which I should warn you is pretty much paints Khora in the most favorable possible light. Enemies are low enough level that you can kill them fairly quickly, and the area for the map is pretty like compact, right? Which makes a lot of her abilities just work much better than they would otherwise, and also make it less inconvenient, like with Strangle Dome when it sucks enemies up to the ceiling and the like. Well, it's a low ceiling, and you know, the map is a little corridorish, so you can just kind of shoot them pretty easily, instead of having these like really high up flinging around enemies like you usually do in other map types. As you can see here, the enemies don't die super fast, but they do die. On this mission, I think she's all right in mission types like this. I'm not going to go through any of the mission types she's more weak at, but I will mention that she's not so useful for, you know, medium to high level exterminates, not super relevant in capture, although who is, not super relevant in really anything that's not some sort of like hold an objective zone, right? So you know, rescue, sabotage, not super great, but she's good for mobile defense. Mobile defense actually in particular, right? It's not endless. You're not constrained by killing enemies, right? So if you just, you know, drop your ult and suck all the enemies up, you're not slowing down the mission in mobile defense. So she's definitely a great mobile defense frame, I would say. And missions like this, especially if I went with maybe the more high power strength, lower range build, she's pretty decent for. Where you just want to like kill a bunch of enemies, actually like kill enemies with Strangle Dome, and kind of practically, or can actually do that in practical terms. So yeah, pretty decent for missions like this. I mean, the majority of Warframe missions are some kind of objective defense, so as long as you bring her to those, she's fine. If you bring her to also like just a slaughter zone kind of thing, like Sanctuary Onslaught, pretty fine. But if you bring her to anything else, not so great. And overall, she's not really one of the best frames for any of the modes she's good at. She's just an okay choice. Kind of like Nyx, right? Because Nyx has this really good CC ability, Chaos. And Chaos is very good CC. Enemies start attacking each other. It's basically mass radiation procs, but a little bit better. It lasts a long time. So that's good. It will prevent enemies from attacking you. But You know what it doesn't do? It doesn't help you kill enemies faster. Actually, it slows down the rate at which you can kill enemies because they don't come to seek you out and die. And so she's kind of bad for defense missions, right? Because the faster you kill the enemies, the faster the wave is cleared, and the faster you get to the rewards. And, you know, it's kind of the same thing with Khora, and the same thing with, like, the issue with Limbo, where, like, you can kind of annoy your allies easily by, like it's some enemies. Come on, someone gonna get sucked into the air? There's not enough enemies for that. But enemies will get sucked up into the air, and then you have to, maybe if they're higher level, you have to actually shoot them to kill them. And it's, you know, all very irritating, basically, right? Not super ally friendly, although if you stick to using Ensnare, that is actually pretty handy, I've got to say. Yeah, so that pretty much covers it for Khora. I think she's pretty usable now, but she's not good, or she's not a frame I would like pick for almost any situation. Yeah. I think that covers it. So, thank you all for watching. If you like this content, you want to see more like it, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and let me know in the comments if you have any, you know, questions about the video, about my Khora build, or whatnot. And, you know, let me know if you'd like to see more, what kind of content you'd like to see in the future. That's all for now. Yakri out.